You've seen it a million times, right? That little padlock icon in your browser's address bar. We all see it and we're told it means our connection is secure. But what does that really mean? What's actually stopping someone from snatching your password right out of the air? Well, it turns out that tiny icon is just the tip of a massive global iceberg of trust. It's all built on a framework of heavy-duty math called public key infrastructure. So let's pull back the curtain and see how the whole thing really works. Here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. First, we'll dig into why the internet needs a foundation of trust in the first place. Then we'll walk through the lightning-fast process that makes that little padlock appear. We'll also look at the scary part. What happens when that trust gets broken? And finally, we'll peek into the future, where a new kind of computer could threaten the very math that keeps us all safe online. All right, let's start at the beginning. You know, the internet wasn't originally designed to be secure. Not at all. It was basically a network for researchers to share information. But once we started using it for shopping, for banking, for, well, everything, a massive problem cropped up. And that problem is really this. How do you know that the website you're talking to is actually your bank? And just as important, how do you make sure your conversation is totally private? Because without a system to handle that, an attacker could just sit in the middle of your connection, reading and even changing everything you send. Every password, every credit card number, it would all be an open book.
The solution the world eventually landed on is public key infrastructure, or PKI. The best way to think about it is like a global digital notary system. It's not just one piece of software, but a whole framework, a set of rules, technologies, and organizations with one big goal: to prove you are who you say you are online, and then to encrypt the conversation. It is the absolute bedrock of secure communication on the internet today.
This quote really gets to the heart of why we have PKI. See, a truly perfect, 100% unbreakable code actually exists. It's called a one-time pad. The only problem? It's a complete nightmare to use for something as huge and fast as the internet. So we had to make a trade-off. PKI is that amazing compromise. It's a system that isn't theoretically perfect, but the math is so incredibly hard to break that for all practical purposes, it's secure. And it's fast enough to handle billions of transactions every single day.
Okay, so how does this all work in the real world? Every single time you visit a secure website, there's this really intricate cryptographic dance that happens in the background, all in a fraction of a second. Let's break down the steps of that dance.
The protocol that leads this dance is called Transport Layer Security, or TLS. You've probably heard of its older name, SSL. TLS is the engine that uses all the rules of PKI to build a secure, encrypted tunnel between your browser and the website you're visiting.
And it all kicks off with something called the TLS handshake. Now, this looks complicated, but your computer does it all in literally the blink of an eye. Your browser says hello and sends a list of all the encryption methods it knows. The server says hello back, picks the strongest one you both support, and then shows its ID card. That's the digital certificate. Your browser quickly checks that ID with a trusted authority. Once it gets the thumbs up, they use some really clever math to create a secret key for just this session, and bam, you're secure. The padlock appears.
Now that trusted authority your browser checked with, that's the most important player here. It's called a certificate authority, or CA. You can think of these organizations as the anchors of the entire system. Their whole job is to verify that the person who owns a domain, like nostarch.com, is really who they claim to be. Only after that verification will they issue that digital passport for the website.
But wait, how does your browser even know which CAs to trust in the first place? Well, here's the secret. It comes with a pre-installed list. Your operating system, whether it's Windows, Mac OS, or Android, has something called a certificate store. It's basically a little vault that contains the root certificates from dozens of globally trusted CAs. So that trust isn't decided on the fly, it's baked right into the software you use from day one. That is the very first link in the chain of trust.
This system is incredibly powerful, but it is not infallible. And actually, its greatest strength is also its biggest weakness. We are all implicitly trusting a pretty small number of these centralized authorities to do the right thing.
And that brings us to the absolute nightmare scenario for internet security. I mean, what happens if one of these trusted anchors of the internet gets hacked? Or worse, what if a CA just decides to go rogue and starts issuing fake certificates on purpose? The fallout would be, well, catastrophic. A compromised CA could create a perfectly valid-looking certificate for Google, for your bank, for literally any site it wanted to. Your browser would trust it completely, that little padlock would appear, and you would have no idea you were actually connected to an attacker's server.
It would enable spying on a massive, totally undetectable scale.
So, to fight this kind of systemic risk, the industry came up with some pretty clever defenses, like certificate transparency logs. These are public record books where every CA has to announce every certificate it issues. That way, a company like Google can just watch the logs to see if a fake certificate for their domain ever pops up. But the challenges aren't just public. On the enterprise side, big companies face the huge technical problem of decrypting massive amounts of traffic at incredible speeds just to scan for malware, which pushes their own security gear to the absolute limit.
But while we worry about these huge systemic risks, rogue CAs and government-level attacks, the reality of most security failures is, well, it's a lot more ordinary. This quote just nails it. The math can be perfect, but the people putting it all together are human.
That's the key takeaway right there. The most common way these systems fail isn't because some genius hacker finally broke the encryption. Nope. It's because someone, somewhere, made a simple mistake. A certificate that someone forgot to renew, a weak security setting that was left on by default, a private key that wasn't properly protected. These basic human errors are what cause the vast majority of real-world security problems.
So everything we've talked about so far are the threats that exist today. But cryptographers are already in a dead sprint against a future threat, one that could make our current encryption about as useful as a password from ancient Rome.
And that threat comes from quantum computers. Now, your computer, my computer, they all use bits, which are either a 0 or a 1. Simple. A quantum computer uses qubits. A qubit can be a 0, a 1, or kind of both at the same time. This weird property lets them attack certain problems in a completely different way that's exponentially more powerful.
And here's the scary part. The entire security of modern PKI is based on the fact that certain math problems are just too hard for our classical computers to solve. For example, it's almost impossible for them to take a huge number and figure out the two prime numbers that were multiplied to create it. But for a future quantum computer, that exact problem would be trivial. What takes our best supercomputers billions of years will be like simple homework for a quantum one.
Because of this, a global race is on to develop and standardize a whole new generation of post-quantum cryptography. Researchers are hunting for new kinds of math problems that they believe will be hard for both classical and quantum computers to crack. And organizations like NIST in the US are leading the effort to pick the winners that will become the new global standards for keeping us safe.
And don't think for a second that this is some distant science fiction problem. As you can see from this timeline, it is happening right now. NIST kicked off its competition way back in 2016. They picked the first round of winners in 2022, and draft standards are being published as we speak. This migration is going to be a long, difficult process, especially for critical infrastructure, but it has to start now. Why? Because adversaries could be recording our encrypted data today and just sitting on it, waiting to decrypt it years from now with a quantum computer.
So, that little padlock in your browser, it represents this incredible, delicate, and constantly changing system of trust. For decades, the math behind it has been considered unbreakable. But as technology leaps forward, we're being reminded that in the world of security, nothing is forever. The race to stay one step ahead of the codebreakers, well, it's a race that never, ever ends.